A gentleman and a lady, traveling from Tunbridge towards that part of the Sussex coast which lies between Hastings and Eastbourne, being induced by business to quit the high road and attempt a very rough lane, were overturned in toiling up its long ascent, half rock, half sand. The accident happened just beyond the only gentleman's house near the lane, a house which their driver, on being first required to take that direction, had conceived to be necessarily their object, and had, with most unwilling looks, been constrained to pass by. He had grumbled and shaken his shoulders, and pitied and cut his horses so sharply that he might have been open to the suspicion of overturning them on purpose, especially as the carriage was not his master's own, if the road had not indisputably become worse than before as soon as the premises of the said house were left behind, expressing with a most portentous countenance that beyond it no wheels but cartwheels could safely proceed. The severity of the fall was broken by their slow pace and the narrowness of the lane, and the gentleman having scrambled out and helped out his companion, they neither of them at first felt more than shaken and bruised. But the gentleman had, in the course of the extrication, sprained his foot, and soon becoming sensible of it, was obliged in a few moments to cut short both his remonstrances to the driver and his congratulations to his wife and himself, and sit down on the bank, unable to stand. "There is something wrong here," said he, putting his hand to his ankle. "But never mind, my dear," looking up at her with a smile. "It could not have happened, you know, in a better place. Good out of evil. The very thing perhaps to be wished for. We shall soon get relief. There, I fancy, lies my cure," pointing to the neat-looking end of a cottage, which was seen romantically situated among wood, on a high eminence at some little distance. "Does not that promise to be the very place?" His wife fervently hoped it was, but stood, terrified and anxious, neither able to do or suggest anything, and receiving her first real comfort from the sight of several persons now coming to their assistance. The accident had been discerned from a hayfield adjoining the house they had passed, and the persons who approached were a well-looking, hale, gentleman-like man, of middle age, the proprietor of the place, who happened to be among his haymakers at the time, and 3 or 4 of the ablest of them summoned to attend their master, to say nothing of all the rest of the field, men, women, and children, not very far off. Mr. Haywood, such was the name of the said proprietor, advanced with a very civil salutation, much concern for the accident, some surprise at anybody's attempting that road in a carriage, and ready offers of assistance. His courtesies were received with good breeding and gratitude, and while 1 or 2 of the men lent their help to the driver in getting the carriage upright again, the traveler said, "You are extremely obliging, sir, and I take you at your word. The injury to my leg is, I dare say, very trifling, but it is always best in these cases, you know, to have a surgeon's opinion without loss of time, and as the road does not seem in a favorable state for my getting up to his house myself, I will thank you to send off one of these good people for the surgeon." "The surgeon, sir," exclaimed Mr. Haywood. "I am afraid you will find no surgeon at hand here, but I dare say we shall do very well without him." "Nay, sir, if he is not in the way, his partner will do just as well, or rather better. I would rather see his partner. Indeed, I would prefer the attendance of his partner. One of these good people can be with him in 3 minutes, I am sure. I need not ask whether I see the house, looking towards the cottage, for excepting your own, we have passed none in this place, which can be the abode of a gentleman. Mr. Haywood looked very much astonished, and replied, "What, sir? Are you expecting to find a surgeon in that cottage? We have neither surgeon nor partner in the parish, I assure you." "Excuse me, sir," replied the other. "I am sorry to have the appearance of contradicting you, but from the extent of the parish or some other cause, you may not be aware of the fact. Stay, can I be mistaken in the place? Am I not in Willingdon? Is not this Willingdon? Yes, sir, this is certainly Willingdon. Then, sir, I can bring proof of your having a surgeon in the parish, whether you may know it or not. Here, sir," taking out his pocketbook, "if you will do me the favor of casting your eye over these advertisements which I cut out myself from the Morning Post and the Kentish Gazette only yesterday morning in London, I think you will be convinced that I am not speaking at random. You will find in it an advertisement of the dissolution of a partnership in the medical line in your own parish, extensive business, undeniable character, respectable references, wishing to form a separate establishment. You will find it at full length, sir, offering the 2 little oblong extracts." "Sir," said Mr. Haywood, with a good-humored smile, "if you were to show me all the newspapers that are printed in 1 week throughout the kingdom, you would not persuade me of there being a surgeon in Willingdon," said Mr. Haywood, with a good-humored smile. "Having lived here ever since I was born, man and boy 57 years, I think I must have known of such a person. At least, I may venture to say that he has not much business. To be sure, if gentlemen were to be often attempting this lane in post-chaises, it might not be a bad speculation for a surgeon to get a house at the top of the hill. But as to that cottage, I can assure you, sir, that it is, in fact, in spite of its spruce air at this distance, as indifferent a double tenement as any in the parish, and that my shepherd lives at one end and 3 old women at the other." He took the pieces of paper as he spoke, and having looked them over, added, "I believe I can explain it, sir. Your mistake is in the place. There are 2 Willingdons in this country, and your advertisement refers to the other, which is Great Willingdon, or Willingdon Abbots, and lies 7 miles off on the other side of Battle, quite down in the Weald. And we, sir," he added, speaking rather proudly, "are not in the Weald." "Not down in the Weald, I am sure," replied the traveler pleasantly. "It took us half an hour to climb your hill. Well, I dare say it is as you say, and I have made an abominably stupid blunder, all done in a moment. The advertisements did not catch my eye till the last half hour of our being in town, when everything was in the hurry and confusion which always attend a short stay there. One is never able to complete anything in the way of business, you know, till the carriage is at the door, and accordingly satisfying myself with a brief inquiry, and finding we were actually to pass within a mile or 2 of a Willingdon, I sought no farther, my dear," to his wife. "I am very sorry to have brought you into this scrape, but do not be alarmed about my leg. It gives me no pain while I am quiet. And as soon as these good people have succeeded in setting the carriage to rights and turning the horses round, the best thing we can do will be to measure back our steps into the turnpike road and proceed to Hailsham, and so home without attempting anything farther. 2 hours take us home from Hailsham, and once at home, we have our remedy at hand, you know. A little of our own bracing sea air will soon set me on my feet again. Depend upon it, my dear, it is exactly a case for the sea. Saline air and immersion will be the very thing. My sensations tell me so already. In a most friendly manner, Mr. Haywood here interposed, entreating them not to think of proceeding till the ankle had been examined and some refreshment taken, and very cordially pressing them to make use of his house for both purposes. We are always well stocked, said he, with all the common remedies for sprains and bruises, and I will answer for the pleasure it will give my wife and daughters to be of service to you in every way in their power. A twinge or two in trying to move his foot disposed the traveler to think rather more than he had done at first of the benefit of immediate assistance, and consulting his wife in the few words of, "Well, my dear, I believe it will be better for us," he turned again to Mr. Haywood and said, "Before we accept your hospitality, sir, and in order to do away with any unfavorable impression which the sort of wild goose chase you find me in may have given rise to, allow me to tell you who we are. My name is Parker, Mr. Parker of Sanditon. This lady, my wife, Mrs. Parker. We are on our road home from London. My name perhaps, though I am by no means the first of my family, holding landed property in the parish of Sanditon, may be unknown at this distance from the coast, but Sanditon itself, everybody has heard of Sanditon. The favorite for a young and rising bathing place, certainly the favorite spot of all that are to be found along the coast of Sussex, the most favored by nature, and promising to be the most chosen by man. Yes, I have heard of Sanditon, replied Mr. Haywood. Every 5 years, one hears of some new place or other, starting up by the sea and growing the fashion. How they can half of them be filled is the wonder, where people can be found with money and time to go to them. Bad things for a country, sure to raise the price of provisions and make the poor good for nothing, as I dare say you find, sir. Not at all, sir, not at all, cried Mr. Parker eagerly. Quite the contrary, I assure you. A common idea, but a mistaken one. It may apply to your large overgrown places, like Brighton or Worthing or Eastbourne, but not to a small village like Sanditon, precluded by its size from experiencing any of the evils of civilization, while the growth of the place, the buildings, the nursery grounds, the demand for everything, and the sure resort of the very best company, whose regular, steady, private families of thorough gentility and character, who are a blessing everywhere, excited the industry of the poor, and diffuse comfort and improvement among them of every sort. No, sir, I assure you, Sanditon is not a place. I do not mean to take exception to any place in particular, answered Mr. Haywood. I only think our coast is too full of them altogether. But had we not better try to get you? Our coast too full, repeated Mr. Parker. On that point, perhaps we may not totally disagree. At least there are enough. Our coast is abundant enough. It demands no more. Everybody's taste and everybody's finances may be suited, and those good people who are trying to add to the number are, in my opinion, excessively absurd, and must soon find themselves the dupes of their own fallacious calculations. Such a place as Sanditon, sir, I may say, was wanted, was called for. Nature had marked it out, had spoken in most intelligible characters. The finest, purest sea breeze on the coast, acknowledged to be so. Excellent bathing, fine hard sand, deep water 10 yards from the shore, no mud, no weeds, no slimy rocks. Never was there a place more palpably designed by nature for the resort of the invalid, the very spot which thousands seemed in need of, the most desirable distance from London, one complete measured mile, nearer than Eastbourne. Only conceive, sir, the advantage of saving a whole mile in a long journey. But Brinshaw, sir, which I dare say you have in your eye, the attempts of 2 or 3 speculating people about Brinshaw this last year, to raise that paltry hamlet, lying, the young ladies approached and said everything that was proper to recommend their father's offers, and in an unaffected manner calculated to make the strangers easy. And as Mrs. Parker was exceedingly anxious for relief, and her husband by this time not much less disposed for it, a very few civil scruples were enough, especially as the carriage, being now set up, was discovered to have received such injury on the fallen side as to be unfit for present use. Mr. Parker was therefore carried into the house, and his carriage wheeled off to a vacant barn. Chapter 2. The acquaintance, thus oddly begun, was neither short nor unimportant. For a whole fortnight, the travelers were fixed at Willingdon, Mr. Parker's sprain proving too serious for him to move sooner. He had fallen into very good hands. The Haywoods were a thoroughly respectable family, and every possible attention was paid in the kindest and most unpretending manner to both husband and wife. He was waited on and nursed, and she cheered and comforted with unremitting kindness, and as every office of hospitality and friendliness was received as it ought, as there was not more goodwill on one side than gratitude on the other, nor any deficiency of generally pleasant manners in either, they grew to like each other, in the course of that fortnight, exceedingly well. Mr. Parker's character and history were soon unfolded. All that he understood of himself he readily told, for he was very open-hearted, and where he might be himself in the dark, his conversation was still giving information to such of the Haywoods as could observe. By such he was perceived to be an enthusiast on the subject of Sanditon, a complete enthusiast. Sanditon, the success of Sanditon, as a small, fashionable bathing place, was the object for which he seemed to live. A very few years ago, it had been a quiet village of no pretensions, but some natural advantages in its position, and some accidental circumstances having suggested to himself and the other principal landholder the probability of its becoming a profitable speculation, they had engaged in it, and planned and built, and praised and puffed, and raised it to something of young renown. And Mr. Parker could now think of very little besides. The facts which, in more direct communication, he laid before them were that he was about 35, had been married, very happily married, 7 years, and had 4 sweet children at home, that he was of a respectable family, and easy, though not large, fortune, no profession, succeeding as eldest son to the property which 2 or 3 generations had been holding and accumulating before him, that he had 2 brothers and 2 sisters, all single and all independent, the eldest of the 2 former indeed, by collateral inheritance, quite as well provided for as himself. His object in quitting the high road to hunt for an advertising surgeon was also plainly stated. It had not proceeded from any intention of spraining his ankle, or doing himself any other injury for the good of such surgeon, nor, as Mr. Haywood had been apt to suppose, from any design of entering into partnership with him. It was merely in consequence of a wish to establish some medical man at Sanditon, which the nature of the advertisement induced him to expect to accomplish in Willingdon. He was convinced that the advantage of a medical man at hand would very materially promote the rise and prosperity of the place, would in fact tend to bring a prodigious influx. Nothing else was wanting. He had strong reason to believe that one family had been deterred last year from trying Sanditon on that account, and probably very many more, and his own sisters, who were sad invalids, and whom he was very anxious to get to Sanditon this summer, could hardly be expected to hazard themselves in a place where they could not have immediate medical advice. Upon the whole, Mr. Parker was evidently an amiable family man, fond of wife, children, brothers and sisters, and generally kind-hearted, liberal, gentlemanlike, easy to please, of a sanguine turn of mind, with more imagination than judgment. And Mrs. Parker was as evidently a gentle, amiable, sweet-tempered woman, the properest wife in the world for a man of strong understanding, but not of a capacity to supply the cooler reflection which her own husband sometimes needed, and so entirely waiting to be guided on every occasion that whether he was risking his fortune or spraining his ankle, she remained equally useless. Sanditon was a second wife and 4 children to him, hardly less dear and certainly more engrossing. He could talk of it forever. It had indeed the highest claims, not only those of birthplace, property, and home. It was his mine, his lottery, his speculation and his hobby horse, his occupation, his hope and his futurity. He was extremely desirous of drawing his good friends at Willingdon thither, and his endeavors in the cause were as grateful and disinterested as they were warm. He wanted to secure the promise of a visit, to get as many of the family as his own house would contain, to follow him to Sanditon as soon as possible, and, healthy as they all undeniably were, foresaw that every one of them would be benefited by the sea. He held it indeed as certain that no person could be really well, no person, however upheld for the present, by fortuitous aids of exercise and spirits, in a semblance of health, could be really in a state of secure and permanent health without spending at least 6 weeks by the sea every year. The sea air and sea bathing together were nearly infallible, one or the other of them being a match for every disorder of the stomach, the lungs, or the blood. They were antispasmodic, antipulmonary, antiseptic, antibilious, and anti-rheumatic. Nobody could catch cold by the sea. Nobody wanted appetite by the sea. Nobody wanted spirits. Nobody wanted strength. Sea air was healing, softening, relaxing, fortifying, and bracing, seemingly just as was wanted, sometimes one, sometimes the other. If the sea breeze failed, the sea bath was the certain corrective, and where bathing disagreed, the sea air alone was evidently designed by nature for the cure. His eloquence, however, could not prevail. Mr. and Mrs. Haywood never left home. Marrying early and having a very numerous family, their movements had long been limited to one small circle, and they were older in habits than in age. Excepting 2 journeys to London in the year to receive his dividends, Mr. Haywood went no farther than his feet or his well-tried old horse could carry him, and Mrs. Haywood's adventurings were only now and then to visit her neighbors in the old coach, which had been new when they married, and fresh lined on their eldest son's coming of age 10 years ago. They had a very pretty property, enough had their family been of reasonable limits to have allowed them a very gentlemanlike share of luxuries and change, enough for them to have indulged in a new carriage and better roads, an occasional month at Tunbridge Wells, and symptoms of the gout and a winter at Bath. But the maintenance, education, and fitting out of 14 children demanded a very quiet, settled, careful course of life, and obliged them to be stationary and healthy at Willingdon. What Prudence had at first enjoined was now rendered pleasant by habit. They never left home, and they had gratification in saying so. But very far from wishing their children to do the same, they were glad to promote their getting out into the world as much as possible. They stayed at home that their children might get out, and, while making that home extremely comfortable, welcomed every change from it, which could give useful connections or respectable acquaintance to sons or daughters. When Mr. and Mrs. Parker, therefore, ceased from soliciting a family visit and bounded their views to carrying back one daughter with them, no difficulties were started. It was general pleasure and consent. Their invitation was to Miss Charlotte Haywood, a very pleasing young woman of 22, the eldest of the daughters at home, and the one who, under her mother's directions, had been particularly useful and obliging to them, who had attended them most and knew them best. Charlotte was to go, with excellent health, to bathe and be better if she could, to receive every possible pleasure which Sanditon could be made to supply by the gratitude of those she went with, and to buy new parasols, new gloves, and new brooches for her sisters and herself at the library, which Mr. Parker was anxiously wishing to support. All that Mr. Haywood himself could be persuaded to promise was that he would send everyone to Sanditon who asked his advice, and that nothing should ever induce him, as far as the future could be answered for, to spend even 5 shillings at Brinshaw. Chapter 3. Every neighborhood should have a great lady. The great lady of Sanditon was Lady Denham, and in their journey from Willingdon to the coast, Mr. Parker gave Charlotte a more detailed account of her than had been called for before. She had been necessarily often mentioned at Willingdon, for being his colleague in speculation. Sanditon itself could not be talked of long without the introduction of Lady Denham. That she was a very rich old lady, who had buried 2 husbands, who knew the value of money, and was very much looked up to, and had a poor cousin living with her, were facts already known, but some further particulars of her history and her character served to lighten the tediousness of a long hill or a heavy bit of road, and to give the visiting young lady a suitable knowledge of the person with whom she might now expect to be daily associating. Lady Denham had been a rich Miss Brereton, born to wealth but not to education. Her first husband had been a Mr. Hollis, a man of considerable property in the country, of which a large share of the parish of Sanditon, with manor and mansion house, made a part. He had been an elderly man when she married him, her own age about 30. Her motives for such a match could be little understood at the distance of 40 years. But she had so well nursed and pleased Mr. Hollis that at his death he left her everything, all his estates, and all at her disposal. After a widowhood of some years, she had been induced to marry again. The late Sir Harry Denham of Denham Park in the neighborhood of Sanditon had succeeded in removing her and her large income to his own domains, but he could not succeed in the views of permanently enriching his family, which were attributed to him. She had been too wary to put anything out of her own power, and when, on Sir Harry's decease, she returned again to her own house at Sanditon, she was said to have made this boast to a friend, that though she had got nothing but her title from the family, still she had given nothing for it, for the title, it was to be supposed she had married, and Mr. Parker acknowledged there being just such a degree of value for it, apparent now, as to give her conduct that natural explanation. "There is at times," said he, "a little self-importance, but it is not offensive, and there are moments, there are points, when her love of money is carried greatly too far. But she is a good-natured woman, a very good-natured woman, a very obliging, friendly neighbor, a cheerful, independent, valuable character, and her faults may be entirely imputed to her want of education. She has good natural sense, but quite uncultivated. She has a fine active mind, as well as a fine healthy frame, for a woman of 70, and enters into the improvement of Sanditon with a spirit truly admirable, though now and then a littleness will appear. She cannot look forward quite as I would have her, and takes alarm at a trifling present expense, without considering what returns it will make her in a year or two. That is, all think differently. We now and then see things differently, Miss Haywood. Those who tell their own story, you know, must be listened to with caution. When you see us in contact, you will judge for yourself. Lady Denham was indeed a great lady, beyond the common wants of society, for she had many thousands a year to bequeath, and 3 distinct sets of people to be courted by. Her own relations, who might very reasonably wish for her original £30,000 among them. The legal heirs of Mr. Hollis, who must hope to be more indebted to her sense of justice than he had allowed them to be to his, and those members of the Denham family whom her second husband had hoped to make a good bargain for. By all of these, or by branches of them, she had no doubt been long, and still continued to be, well attacked, and of these 3 divisions, Mr. Parker did not hesitate to say that Mr. Hollis's kindred were the least in favor, and Sir Harry Denham's the most. The former, he believed, had done themselves irremediable harm by expressions of very unwise and unjustifiable resentment. At the time of Mr. Hollis's death, the latter had the advantage of being the remnant of a connection which she certainly valued, of having been known to her from their childhood, and of being always at hand to preserve their interest by reasonable attention. Sir Edward, the present baronet, nephew to Sir Harry, resided constantly at Denham Park, and Mr. Parker had little doubt that he and his sister, Miss Denham, who lived with him, would be principally remembered in her will. He sincerely hoped it. Miss Denham had a very small provision, and her brother was a poor man for his rank in society. "He is a warm friend to Sanditon," said Mr. Parker, "and his hand would be as liberal as his heart, had he the power. He would be a noble coadjutor. As it is, he does what he can, and is running up a tasteful little cottage ornée on a strip of waste ground Lady Denham has granted him, which I have no doubt we shall have many a candidate for, before the end even of this season. Till within the last 12 months, Mr. Parker had considered Sir Edward as standing without a rival, as having the fairest chance of succeeding to the greater part of all that she had to give. But there were now another person's claims to be taken into account, those of the young female relation whom Lady Denham had been induced to receive into her family. After having always protested against any such addition, and long and often enjoyed the repeated defeats she had given to every attempt of her relations to introduce this young lady or that young lady as a companion at Sanditon House, she had brought back with her from London last Michaelmas a Miss Brereton, who bid fair by her merits to vie in favor with Sir Edward and to secure for herself and her family that share of the accumulated property which they had certainly the best right to inherit. Mr. Parker spoke warmly of Clara Brereton, and the interest of his story increased very much with the introduction of such a character. Charlotte listened with more than amusement now. It was solicitude and enjoyment, as she heard her described to be lovely, amiable, gentle, unassuming, conducting herself uniformly, with great good sense, and evidently gaining by her innate worth on the affections of her patroness. Beauty, sweetness, poverty, and dependence do not want the imagination of a man to operate upon. With due exceptions, woman feels for woman very promptly and compassionately. He gave the particulars which had led to Clara's admission at Sanditon as no bad exemplification of that mixture of character, that union of littleness, with kindness, with good sense, with even liberality, which he saw in Lady Denham. After having avoided London for many years, principally on account of these very cousins who were continually writing, inviting and tormenting her, and whom she was determined to keep at a distance, she had been obliged to go there last Michaelmas, with the certainty of being detained at least a fortnight. She had gone to a hotel, living by her own account, as prudently as possible, to defy the reputed expensiveness of such a home, and at the end of 3 days, calling for her bill that she might judge of her state. Its amount was such as determined her on staying not another hour in the house, and she was preparing in all the anger and perturbation of her belief in very gross imposition there, and her ignorance of where to go for better usage, to leave the hotel at all hazards, when the cousins, the politic and lucky cousins, who seemed always to have a spy on her, introduced themselves at this important moment, and learning her situation, persuaded her to accept such a home for the rest of her stay as their humbler house in a very inferior part of London could offer. She went, was delighted with her welcome and the hospitality and attention she received from everybody, found her good cousins, the Breretons beyond her expectation worthy people, and finally was impelled by a personal knowledge of their narrow income and pecuniary difficulties to invite one of the girls of the family to pass the winter with her. The invitation was to one for 6 months, with the probability of another being then to take her place. But in selecting the one, Lady Denham had shown the good part of her character, for passing by the actual daughters of the house, she had chosen Clara, a niece, more helpless and more pitiable of course than any, a dependent on poverty, an additional burden on an encumbered circle, and one who had been so low in every worldly view as, with all her natural endowments and powers, to have been preparing for a situation little better than a nursery maid. Clara had returned with her, and by her good sense and merit had now, to all appearance, secured a very strong hold in Lady Denham's regard. The 6 months had long been over, and not a syllable was breathed of any change or exchange. She was a general favorite. The influence of her steady conduct and mild, gentle temper was felt by everybody. The prejudices which had met her at first in some quarters were all dissipated. She was felt to be worthy of trust, to be the very companion who would guide and soften Lady Denham, who would enlarge her mind and open her hand. She was as thoroughly amiable as she was lovely, and since having had the advantage of their Sanditon breezes, that loveliness was complete. Chapter 4. "And whose very snug-looking place is this?" said Charlotte, as in a sheltered dip within 2 miles of the sea, they passed close by a moderate-sized house, well fenced and planted, and rich in the garden, orchard, and meadows, which are the best embellishments of such a dwelling. It seems to have as many comforts about it as Willingdon. "Ah," said Mr. Parker, "this is my old house, the house of my forefathers, the house where I and all my brothers and sisters were born and bred, and where my own 3 eldest children were born, where Mrs. Parker and I lived till within the last 2 years, till our new house was finished. I am glad you are pleased with it. It is an honest old place, and Hillier keeps it in very good order. I have given it up, you know, to the man who occupies the chief of my land. He gets a better house by it, and I, a rather better situation. One other hill brings us to Sanditon, modern Sanditon, a beautiful spot. Our ancestors, you know, always built in a hole. Here were we, penned down, in this little contracted nook, without air or view, only 1 mile and 3/4 from the noblest expanse of ocean between the South Foreland and Land's End, and without the smallest advantage from it. You will not think I have made a bad exchange when we reach Trafalgar House, which, by the by, I almost wish I had not named Trafalgar, for Waterloo is more the thing now. However, Waterloo is in reserve, and if we have encouragement enough this year for a little crescent to be ventured on, as I trust we shall, then we shall be able to call it Waterloo Crescent, and the name joined to the form of the building, which always takes, will give us the command of lodgers. In a good season, we should have more applications than we could attend to. It was always a very comfortable house," said Mrs. Parker, looking at it through the back window with something like the fondness of regret. "And such a nice garden, such an excellent garden. Yes, my love, but that we may be said to carry with us. It supplies us, as before, with all the fruit and vegetables we want. And we have, in fact, all the comfort of an excellent kitchen garden, without the constant eyesore of its formalities, or the yearly nuisance of its decaying vegetation. Who can endure a cabbage bed in October? Oh dear, yes. We are quite as well off for garden stuff as ever we were, for if it is forgot to be brought at any time, we can always buy what we want at Sanditon House. The gardener there is glad enough to supply us. But it was a nice place for the children to run about in. So shady in summer. My dear, we shall have shade enough on the hill, and more than enough in the course of a very few years. The growth of my plantations is a general astonishment. In the meanwhile, we have the canvas awning, which gives us the most complete comfort within doors. And you can get a parasol at Whitby's, for little Mary at any time, or a large bonnet at Jep's. And as for the boys, I must say I would rather them run about in the sunshine than not. I am sure we agree, my dear, in wishing our boys to be as hardy as possible. Yes, indeed, I am sure we do. And I will get Mary a little parasol, which will make her as proud as can be. How grave she will walk about with it, and fancy herself quite a little woman. Oh, I have not the smallest doubt of our being a great deal better off where we are now. If we any of us want to bathe, we have not a 1/4 of a mile to go. But you know, still looking back, one loves to look at an old friend, at a place where one has been happy. The Hilliers did not seem to feel the storms last winter at all. I remember seeing Mrs. Hillier after one of those dreadful nights, when we had been literally rocked in our bed, and she did not seem at all aware of the wind being anything more than common. Yes, that's likely enough. we have all the grandeur of the storm with less real danger, because the wind, meeting with nothing to oppose or confine it around our house, simply rages and passes on. While down in this gutter, nothing is known of the state of the air below the tops of the trees, and the inhabitants may be taken totally unawares by one of those dreadful currents which do more mischief in a valley when they do arise than an open country ever experiences in the heaviest gale. But my dear love, as to garden stuff, you were saying that any accidental omission is supplied in a moment by Lady Denham's gardener. But it occurs to me that we ought to go elsewhere upon such occasions, and that old Stringer and his son have a higher claim. I encouraged him to set up, you know, and am afraid he does not do very well. That is, there has not been time enough yet. He will do very well beyond a doubt. But at first it is uphill work, and therefore we must give him what help we can. When any vegetables or fruit happen to be wanted, and it will not be amiss to have them often wanted, to have something or other forgotten most days, just to have a nominal supply, you know, that poor old Andrew may not lose his daily job, but in fact to buy the chief of our consumption from the Stringers. Very well, my love, that can be easily done, and cook will be satisfied, which will be a great comfort, for she is always complaining of old Andrew now, and says he never brings her what she wants. There now, the old house is quite left behind. What is it your brother Sidney says about its being a hospital? Oh, my dear Mary, merely a joke of his. He pretends to advise me to make a hospital of it. He pretends to laugh at my improvements. Sidney says anything, you know. He has always said what he chose, of and to us all. Most families have such a member among them, I believe, Miss Haywood. There is someone in most families, privileged by superior abilities or spirits to say anything. In ours it is Sidney, who is a very clever young man, and with great powers of pleasing. He lives too much in the world to be settled. That is his only fault. He is here and there and everywhere. I wish we may get him to Sanditon. I should like to have you acquainted with him, and it would be a fine thing for the place. Such a young man as Sidney, with his neat equipage and fashionable air. You and I, Mary, know what effect it might have. Many a respectable family, many a careful mother, many a pretty daughter, might it secure us to the prejudice of Eastbourne and Hastings. They were now approaching the church and the real village of Sanditon, which stood at the foot of the hill they were afterwards to ascend, a hill whose side was covered with the woods and enclosures of Sanditon House, and whose height ended in an open down where the new buildings might soon be looked for, a branch only of the valley winding more obliquely towards the sea gave a passage to an inconsiderable stream, and formed at its mouth a third habitable division in a small cluster of fishermen's houses. The original village contained little more than cottages, but the spirit of the day had been caught, as Mr. Parker observed with delight to Charlotte, and 2 or 3 of the best of them were smartened up with a white curtain and lodgings to let. And farther on, in the little green court of an old farmhouse, 2 females in elegant white were actually to be seen with their books and camp stools. And in turning the corner of the baker's shop, the sound of a harp might be heard through the upper casement. Such sights and sounds were highly blissful to Mr. Parker. Not that he had any personal concern in the success of the village itself, for considering it as too remote from the beach, he had done nothing there. But it was a most valuable proof of the increasing fashion of the place altogether. If the village could attract, the hill might be nearly full. He anticipated an amazing season. At the same time, last year, late in July, there had not been a single lodger in the village, nor did he remember any during the whole summer, excepting one family of children who came from London for sea air after the whooping cough, and whose mother would not let them be nearer the shore for fear of their tumbling in. Civilization, civilization indeed, cried Mr. Parker, delighted. Look, my dear Mary, look at William Healy's windows. Blue shoes and nankin boots. Who would have expected such a sight at a shoemaker's in old Sanditon? This is new within the month. There was no blue shoe when we passed this way a month ago. Glorious indeed. Well, I think I have done something in my day. Now, for our hill, our health-breathing hill. In ascending, they passed the lodge gates of Sanditon House and saw the top of the house itself among its groves. It was the last building of former days in that line of the parish. A little higher up, the modern began, and in crossing the down, a prospect house, a Bellevue cottage, and a Denham place were to be looked at by Charlotte with the calmness of amused curiosity, and by Mr. Parker with the eager eye which hoped to see scarcely any empty houses, more bills at the windows than he had calculated on, and a smaller show of company on the hill, fewer carriages, fewer walkers. He had fancied it just the time of day for them to be all returning from their airings to dinner. But the sands and the terrace always attracted some, and the tide must be flowing about half-tide now. He longed to be on the sands, the cliffs, at his own house, and everywhere out of his house at once. His spirits rose with the very sight of the sea, and he could almost feel his ankle getting stronger already. Trafalgar House, on the most elevated spot on the down, was a light, elegant building, standing in a small lawn with a very young plantation round it, about 100 yards from the brow of a steep but not very lofty cliff, and the nearest to it of every building, excepting one short row of smart-looking houses, called the terrace, with a broad walk in front, aspiring to be the mall of the place. In this row were the best milliner's shop and the library, a little detached from it, the hotel and billiard room. Here began the descent to the beach and to the bathing machines, and this was therefore the favorite spot for beauty and fashion. At Trafalgar House, rising at a little distance behind the terrace, the travelers were safely set down, and all was happiness and joy between Papa and Mamma and their children, while Charlotte, having received possession of her apartment, found amusement enough in standing at her ample Venetian window and looking over the miscellaneous foreground of unfinished buildings, waving linen and tops of houses, to the sea, dancing and sparkling in sunshine and freshness. Chapter 5. When they met before dinner, Mr. Parker was looking over letters. "Not a line from Sydney," said he. "He is an idle fellow. I sent him an account of my accident from Willingdon, and thought he would have vouchsafed me an answer. But perhaps it implies that he is coming himself. I trust it may. But here is a letter from one of my sisters. They never fail me. Women are the only correspondents to be depended on. Now, Mary," smiling at his wife, "before I open it, what shall we guess as to the state of health of those it comes from? Or rather, what would Sidney say if he were here? Sidney is a saucy fellow, Miss Haywood, and you must know he will have it. There is a good deal of imagination in my two sisters' complaints, but it really is not so, or very little. They have wretched health, as you have heard us say frequently, and are subject to a variety of very serious disorders. Indeed, I do not believe they know what a day's health is. And at the same time, they are such excellent, useful women, and have so much energy of character, that where any good is to be done, they force themselves on exertions, which to those who do not thoroughly know them, have an extraordinary appearance. But there is really no affectation about them, you know. They have only weaker constitutions and stronger minds than are often met with, either separate or together. And our youngest brother, who lives with them, and who is not much above 20, I am sorry to say, is almost as great an invalid as themselves. He is so delicate that he can engage in no profession. Sydney laughs at him, but it really is no joke, though Sydney often makes me laugh at them all in spite of myself. Now, if he were here, I know he would be offering odds that either Susan, Diana, or Arthur would appear by this letter to have been at the point of death within the last month. Having run his eye over the letter, he shook his head and began, "No chance of seeing them at Sanditon, I am sorry to say. A very indifferent account of them indeed. Seriously, a very indifferent account. Mary, you will be quite sorry to hear how ill they have been and are. Miss Haywood, if you will give me leave, I will read Diana's letter aloud. I like to have my friends acquainted with each other, and I am afraid this is the only sort of acquaintance I shall have the means of accomplishing between you. And I can have no scruple on Diana's account, for her letters show her exactly as she is, the most active, friendly, warm-hearted being in existence, and therefore must give a good impression." He read, "My dear Tom, we were all much grieved at your accident, and if you had not described yourself as fallen into such very good hands, I should have been with you at all hazards the day after the receipt of your letter, though it found me suffering under a more severe attack than usual of my old grievance, spasmodic bile, and hardly able to crawl from my bed to the sofa. But how were you treated? Send me more particulars in your next. If indeed a simple sprain, as you denominate it, nothing would have been so judicious as friction. Friction by the hand alone, supposing it could be applied instantly. 2 years ago, I happened to be calling on Mrs. Sheldon, when her coachman sprained his foot as he was cleaning the carriage, and could hardly limp into the house, but by the immediate use of friction alone steadily persevered in, and I rubbed his ankle with my own hand for 6 hours without intermission. He was well in 3 days. Many thanks, my dear Tom, for the kindness with respect to us, which had so large a share in bringing on your accident. But pray never run into peril again in looking for an apothecary on our account, for had you the most experienced man in his line settled at Sanditon, it would be no recommendation to us. We have entirely done with the whole medical tribe. We have consulted physician after physician in vain, till we are quite convinced that they can do nothing for us, and that we must trust to our own knowledge of our own wretched constitutions for any relief. But if you think it advisable for the interest of the place to get a medical man there, I will undertake the commission with pleasure, and have no doubt of succeeding. I could soon put the necessary irons in the fire. As for getting to Sanditon myself, it is quite an impossibility. I grieve to say that I dare not attempt it, but my feelings tell me too plainly that in my present state, the sea air would probably be the death of me, and neither of my dear companions will leave me, or I would promote their going down to you for a fortnight. But in truth, I doubt whether Susan's nerves would be equal to the effort. She has been suffering much from the headache, and 6 leeches a day for 10 days together relieved her so little that we thought it right to change our measures, and being convinced on examination that much of the evil lay in her gum, I persuaded her to attack the disorder there. She has accordingly had 3 teeth drawn, and is decidedly better, but her nerves are a good deal deranged. She can only speak in a whisper, and fainted away twice this morning on poor Arthur's trying to suppress a cough. He, I am happy to say, is tolerably well, though more languid than I like, and I fear for his liver. I have heard nothing of Sidney since your being together in town, but conclude his scheme to the Isle of Wight has not taken place, or we should have seen him in his way. Most sincerely, do we wish you a good season at Sanditon, and though we cannot contribute to your beau monde in person, we are doing our utmost to send you company worth having, and think we may safely reckon on securing you 2 large families, one a rich West Indian from Surrey, the other a most respectable girls' boarding school, or academy from Camberwell. I will not tell you how many people I have employed in the business, wheel within wheel, but success more than repays. Yours most affectionately. Well, said Mr. Parker as he finished, though I dare say Sidney might find something extremely entertaining in this letter, and make us laugh for half an hour together, I declare I, by myself, can see nothing in it but what is either very pitiable or very creditable. With all their sufferings, you perceive how much they are occupied in promoting the good of others. So anxious for Sanditon. 2 large families, one for Prospect House probably, the other for number 2 Denham Place, or the end house of the terrace, with extra beds at the hotel. I told you my sister were excellent women, Miss Haywood, and I am sure they must be very extraordinary ones, said Charlotte. I am astonished at the cheerful style of the letter, considering the state in which both sisters appear to be. 3 teeth drawn at once, frightful. Your sister Diana seems almost as ill as possible, but those 3 teeth of your sister Susan's are more distressing than all the rest. Oh, they are so used to the operation, to every operation, and have such fortitude. Your sisters know what they are about, I dare say, but their measures seem to touch on extremes. I feel that in any illness, I should be so anxious for professional advice, so very little venturesome for myself or anybody I loved. But then we have been so healthy a family that I can be no judge of what the habit of self-doctoring may do. Why, to own the truth, said Mrs. Parker, I do think the Miss Parkers carry it too far sometimes. And so do you, my love, you know. You often think they would be better if they would leave themselves more alone, and especially Arthur. I know you think it a great pity they should give him such a turn for being ill. Well, well, my dear Mary, I grant you it is unfortunate for poor Arthur that at his time of life he should be encouraged to give way to indisposition. It is bad that he should be fancying himself too sickly for any profession, and sit down at 21 on the interest of his own little fortune, without any idea of attempting to improve it, or of engaging in any occupation that may be of use to himself or others. But let us talk of pleasanter things. These 2 large families are just what we wanted. But here is something at hand, pleasanter still. Morgan with his dinner on table. Chapter 6. The party were very soon moving after dinner. Mr. Parker could not be satisfied without an early visit to the library and the library subscription book, and Charlotte was glad to see as much and as quickly as possible. Where all was new, they were out in the very quietest part of a watering place day, when the important business of dinner, or of sitting after dinner, was going on in almost every inhabited lodging. Here and there might be seen a solitary elderly man who was forced to move early and walk for health, but in general it was a thorough pause of company. It was emptiness and tranquility on the terrace, the cliffs, and the sands. The shops were deserted. The straw hats and pendant lace seemed left to their fate, both within the house and without, and Mrs. Whitby at the library was sitting in her inner room, reading one of her own novels for want of employment. The list of subscribers was but commonplace. The Lady Denham, Miss Brereton, Mr. and Mrs. Parker, Sir Edward Denham, and Miss Denham, whose names might be said to lead off the season, were followed by nothing better than Mrs. Matthews, Miss Matthews, Miss E. Matthews, Miss H. Matthews, Dr. and Mrs. Brown, Mr. Richard Pratt, Lieutenant Smith R.N., Captain Little Limehouse, Mrs. Jane Fisher, Miss Scroggs, Reverend Mr. Hanking, Mr. Beard, Solicitor, Gray's Inn, Mrs. Davis, and Miss Merriweather. Mr. Parker could not but feel that the list was not only without distinction, but less numerous than he had hoped. It was but July, however, and August and September were the months, and besides, the promised large families from Surrey and Camberwell were an ever-ready consolation. Mrs. Whitby came forward without delay from her literary recess, delighted to see Mr. Parker, whose manners recommended him to everybody, and they were fully occupied in their various civilities and communications, while Charlotte, having added her name to the list as the first offering to the success of the season, was busy in some immediate purchases for the further good of everybody. As soon as Miss Whitby could be hurried down from her toilette, with all her glossy curls and smart trinkets to wait on her, the library, of course, afforded everything, all the useless things in the world that could not be done without. And among so many pretty temptations, and with so much goodwill for Mr. Parker to encourage expenditure, Charlotte began to feel that she must check herself, or rather she reflected that at 22 there could be no excuse for her doing otherwise, and that it would not do for her to be spending all her money the very first evening. She took up a book. It happened to be a volume of Camilla. She had not Camilla's youth and had no intention of having her distress, so she turned from the drawers of rings and brooches, repressed further solicitation, and paid for what she had bought. For her particular gratification, they were then to take a turn on the cliff, but as they quitted the library, they were met by two ladies whose arrival made an alteration necessary. Lady Denham and Miss Brereton. They had been to Trafalgar House and been directed thence to the library. And though Lady Denham was a great deal too active to regard the walk of a mile as anything requiring rest, and talked of going home again directly, the Parkers knew that to be pressed into their house and obliged to take her tea with them would suit her best, and therefore the stroll on the cliff gave way to an immediate return home. "No, no," said her ladyship, "I will not have you hurry your tea on my account. I know you like your tea late. My early hours are not to put my neighbors to inconvenience. No, no, Miss Clara and I will get back to our own tea. We came out with no other thought. We wanted just to see you and to make sure of your being really come, but we get back to our own tea." She went on, however, towards Trafalgar House, and took possession of the drawing room, very quietly, without seeming to hear a word of Mrs. Parker's orders to the servant as they entered to bring tea directly. Charlotte was fully consoled for the loss of her walk by finding herself in company with those whom the conversation of the morning had given her a great curiosity to see. She observed them well. Lady Denham was of middle height, stout, upright, and alert in her motions, with a shrewd eye and self-satisfied air, but not an unagreeable countenance, and though her manner was rather downright and abrupt, as of a person who valued herself on being free-spoken, there was a good humor and cordiality about her, a civility and readiness to be acquainted with Charlotte herself, and a heartiness of welcome towards her old friends, which was inspiring the goodwill she seemed to feel. And as for Miss Brereton, her appearance so completely justified Mr. Parker's praise that Charlotte thought she had never beheld a more lovely or more interesting young woman. Elegantly tall, regularly handsome, with great delicacy of complexion and soft blue eyes, a sweetly modest and yet naturally graceful address, Charlotte could see in her only the most perfect representation of whatever heroine might be most beautiful and bewitching in all the numerous volumes they had left behind on Mrs. Whitby's shelves. Perhaps it might be partly owing to her having just issued from a circulating library, but she could not separate the idea of a complete heroine from Clara Brereton, her situation with Lady Denham so very much in favor of it. She seemed placed with her on purpose to be ill-used. Such poverty and dependence, joined to such beauty and merit, seemed to leave no choice in the business. These feelings were not the result of any spirit of romance in Charlotte herself. No, she was a very sober-minded young lady, sufficiently well-read in novels to supply her imagination with amusement, but not at all unreasonably influenced by them. And while she pleased herself the first 5 minutes with fancying the persecution which ought to be the lot of the interesting Clara, especially in the form of the most barbarous conduct on Lady Denham's side, she found no reluctance to admit from subsequent observation that they appeared to be on very comfortable terms. She could see nothing worse in Lady Denham than the sort of old-fashioned formality of always calling her Miss Clara, nor anything objectionable in the degree of observance and attention which Clara paid. On one side, it seemed protecting kindness, on the other, grateful and affectionate respect. The conversation turned entirely upon Sanditon, its present number of visitants, and the chances of a good season. It was evident that Lady Denham had more anxiety, more fears of loss than her coadjutor. She wanted to have the place fill faster and seemed to have many harassing apprehensions of the lodgings, being in some instances underlet. Miss Diana Parker's 2 large families were not forgotten. Very good, said her ladyship. A West India family and a school. That sounds well. That will bring money. No people spend more freely, I believe, than West Indians, observed Mr. Parker. Aye, so I have heard, and because they have full purses, fancy themselves equal, maybe, to your old country families. But then they who scatter their money so freely never think of whether they may not be doing mischief by raising the price of things. And I have heard that's very much the case with your West Indians. And if they come among us to raise the price of our necessaries of life, we shall not much thank them, Mr. Parker. My dear madam, they can only raise the price of consumable articles by such an extraordinary demand for them and such a diffusion of money among us as must do us more good than harm. Our butchers and bakers and traders in general cannot get rich without bringing prosperity to us. If they do not gain, our rents must be insecure, and in proportion to their profit must be ours eventually in the increased value of our houses. Oh, well. But I should not like to have butcher's meat raised, though, and I shall keep it down as long as I can. Aye, that young lady smiles, I see. I dare say she thinks me an odd sort of creature, but she will come to care about such matters herself in time. Yes, my dear, depend upon it, you will be thinking of the price of butcher's meat in time, though you may not happen to have quite such a servants' hall to feed as I have. And I do believe those are best off that have fewest servants. I am not a woman of parade, as all the world knows, and if it was not for what I owe to poor Mr. Hollis's memory, I should never keep up Sanditon House as I do. It is not for my own pleasure. Well, Mr. Parker, and the other is a boarding school, a French boarding school, is it? No harm in that. They'll stay there 6 weeks, and out of such a number, who knows, but some may be consumptive and want ass's milk, and I have 2 milch asses at this present time. But perhaps the little misses may hurt the furniture. I hope they will have a good sharp governess to look after them. Poor Mr. Parker got no more credit from Lady Denham than he had from his sisters for the object which had taken him to Willingdon. Lord, my dear sir, she cried, how could you think of such a thing? I am very sorry you met with your accident, but upon my word, you deserved it. Going after a doctor. Why, what should we do with a doctor here? It would be only encouraging our servants and the poor to fancy themselves ill if there was a doctor at hand. Oh, pray, let us have none of the tribe at Sanditon. We go on very well as we are. There is the sea and the downs and my milch asses. And I have told Mrs. Whitby that if anybody inquires for a chamber horse, they may be supplied at a fair rate. Poor Mr. Hollis's chamber horse as good as new. And what can people want for more? Here have I lived 70 good years in the world, and never took physic above twice, and never saw the face of a doctor in all my life on my own account. And I verily believe if my poor dear Sir Harry had never seen one neither, he would have been alive now. 10 fees, one after another, did the man take who sent him out of the world. I beseech you, Mr. Parker, no doctors here. The tea things were brought in. Oh, my dear Mrs. Parker, you should not indeed. Why would you do so? I was just upon the point of wishing you good evening, but since you are so very neighborly, I believe Miss Clara and I must stay